And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. I have the great pleasure to introduce Mark Lynd, who is head of digital business at NETSYNC. Mark, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining.
Oh, yeah. Good morning. Thanks.
So, Mark, I looked at your profile on LinkedIn, and it's crazy. We have over 600 mutual connections. Got to be some sort of record or something. We must hang out in the same circles somewhere.
We must.
At least the digital circles, that is. And
Indeed.
you're very prolific. You really are contributing to the space in vast amounts. And I was looking to see where which topics can we cover today. But before we get started, maybe for people that don't know you, which probably is not that many if they are in the cybersecurity space, just give me an idea of how you start your career, how you progress. You spent some time in the military, and then you got into the private industry and so on. And how do you became so proficient in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'd say, I feel pretty blessed because I had a very interesting avenue to get into this business. I was in the 3rd Ranger Battalion, the U.S. Army, and I was in the mortars, and I was a mortar sergeant, and I happened to injure my knee on one of the jumps. And when I did, I had like 3 or 4 months where I, had to do an alternate duty. And so I actually worked in the administration, S2, which is, up in the pack and all that. It's kind of battalion intelligence / administration, if you will. Mm-hmm. And while I was up there, they're like, look, we don't have anything for you right now, but you can go to this computer class. And this, computers were still not heavily in the military. They were in the military, but especially not in the infantry side of it, if you will, and definitely not Ranger. So I said, you know what, I'll do it. And so I went to this class, and it was It was called CPT training. Computer processing training. It was very, very generic, right? And I went, and I tell you, I had one of those, and this is why I feel blessed. The minute I just started doing the keyboard, that first class, I went out of there and I said, I'm getting out of the military after my term. I'm going to do my term. I'm going to do it well, and I did. And I'm going to go out, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to finish college because I had finished, about half of my college, and so I went back. And that's exactly what I did. And so that moment, and then computers came into the mortars as I went into the 82nd for fire control. You put in barometric pressure, wind speed, all these variables, and it spits out deflection, elevation, and charge. And so it was a truly wonderful, kind of intersection of things that just lit me up and really gave me the direction that I needed. And when I got out, I went back to the University of Tulsa, and I went and got my, degree in 2 different ways. I got a business degree, but I also did computer science because I wanted to learn to code and do that. And I often tell people now, when you go in this, you really got to make that determination of how you want to look at things and how do you start out? Are you a coder? Are you in technical sales? What are you in, right? And by the way, they're all as you know, they're all fantastic avenues. But that's how I got into it. I was a coder, then I became a network administrator, and then because I have a big mouth and like to talk a lot, right? A lot of technical people didn't have that capability, and I kept getting promoted. And next thing you know, I'm a CIO, then a CTO, CISO for large global concerns, and then a $72 billion financial services company. And now I'm at NETSYNC, about a $650 million VAR reseller. And, I'm really focused on using those skills and really working with clients to get great outcomes because there's still some issues there. But that culmination, that beginning really set me up and gave me a really strong path to get to that. And I get asked all the time, how do I get into cybersecurity? How do I do that? And I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, look, you got to find your path. You got to find out, do you want to be a coder? Because it's way different than being a technical salesperson or a salesperson. Mm-hmm. And it's much different than being a support person or a network administrator. So, it's amazing how that worked. And I was very blessed and lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing story. And what's amazing about the story is that, one door closed and another door opened, you were able to
Yeah.
take advantage of it. And as you mentioned, you were at the right time, the right place where computers were just taking off. But you
Yeah, and I
also,
would have been a lifer.
Mhm.
I would have been a lifer. I was actually thinking about going into Special Forces, 18 Bravo, and doing some of that stuff. So I definitely had a path. When I went in the military, I went in, I really had a path that I wanted to follow. And it's like I said, it's that intersection. I saw these things and then I was like, that's going to apply to a lot of different things. And it really opened my eyes.
And you were like that person that was Jim Carrey with the yes man. He comes over and just whatever is being asked, you just say yes, I'll do it. It sounds like you're the kind of guy that doesn't say no to a challenge. And you also went ahead and did a bunch of certification as well. So you were committed to not just the taking the degree, but also committed to certification as well in the cybersecurity space.
Yeah, after one of the startups went well and we did well on it, my wife was also in a startup and she's at Oracle pricing for the cloud. She's one of their directors over there, and we had a brief moment where we took a year off. We were afforded the luxury. We were once again very blessed. We did really well. And we took it off, and we used to tell all our friends, we're just going to go look at waterfalls. So we drove all over the United States and flew all over the United States looking at waterfalls. Now, we did actually see some waterfalls, but in the midst of that, because of the type of people we are, we both ended up getting a lot of certifications. And like we both went and did the PMP, which is a fairly difficult, certification for project management. And I did it with her just so we could do it together. And I didn't keep it. I kept it for like 10 years or something because I just had too many certs. But it was that kind of thinking, even when we were trying to relax, there was something that needed to be accomplished. And it's funny because you see a lot of people like that today, where, in the past, the 80s, 90s, sometimes people weren't so driven towards this technical driven society. You really see a lot of that now where people find these things. And you mentioned how it happens digitally. It does happen digitally and it
Mhm.
happens a lot. And it's so much easier and there's so much more access.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's so many resources now. As you mentioned, people always ask you, how do you get in? There are just basically multiple ways, right? You can take a
Mhm.
degree, or you can just, trying to get in and volunteer to some organization. Like I've heard that there's a lot of non-for-profits looking for people that they can, secure some of the networks or do like mini projects, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of areas you can give back and gain that first experience. So you are customer facing today, right? You're dealing a
I
lot
am.
with organizations. So, um, and I see you, you know, preaching or just talking a bit about, cyber hygiene and how important that is to organizations, right? Um, what do you find is the most kind of challenging area within cyber hygiene for these organizations to follow? If you could, maybe point to a couple.
Well, I'm going to take one that's probably not as well known, unless you're on my side of the ball, right? You're customer facing and you're at a manufacturer or a VAR or reseller or something, because we see so many customers. What I hear all the time is, "Oh, we just don't have the money, or we don't have the time, or we don't have the resources," and where that kind of takes you, it kind of takes you in kind of a dark area, right? Is that then when it happens, because ultimately, if you use zero trust or NIST or any of those, one of the first things you do is just assume you're going to get hit, right? Then you got to identify using some kind of threat intelligence what is the most likely culprit of that kind of piece, and this plays into the cyber hygiene. And because of that, I need to take some steps. And so identifying what those early steps are and not getting caught up in it's easy to say no. A lot of organizations, they see the security group as always saying no. No, you can't deploy that application without going through us. Can't do this without that. And there's just a lot of no. And I've heard that over and over and over again. And I think that impacts the cyber hygiene, because ultimately what happens, it becomes a us versus them type of relationship. And it impacts. Well, they didn't help me out. I couldn't get my application. I couldn't do this. They wouldn't let me get on the network. They won't give me access to this directory, whatever it may be. And even if it was done for the right reasons, right? They just didn't agree with the policy. The fact is that impacts that. And so in a lot of organizations, both public and private sector now, you see this relationship, and it truly impacts cyber hygiene, because it's like, oh, I'm not going to help them out, or I'm not going to do this, I'm that, because everybody in the company is responsible for cyber security. They just are. Everybody has to be. And until that's the case, all it takes is one person to click on an email. All it takes is one insider to say, I should have access to that. They didn't give it to me. I'm going to get it anyway. Or I'm going to copy it. Or somebody to make a box account and move, some information out there. And I think those really impact cyber hygiene. And some of that is the reason why you should do cyber hygiene. And some of that is the relationship that impacts cyber hygiene.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've from interviewing a bunch of CISOs, they mentioned that one of the things they do, I think, to overcome what you just mentioned is specifically they're trying to align themselves to the business. And so the first 30, 60 days, all they do is sit around with the kind of the business owners, the stakeholders, the different business units, and figure out what the business is and what's important to protect. And that way they can align their goals with the business goals, so they're not like have that butting heads with the with just saying no, as you mentioned, it become that friction, right? So is
Yeah.
also true from your experience as well?
No, it's 100% true. And it's unfortunate, because I think ultimately all parties are trying to get to the right outcome, right? Provide really, really good next generation services so their organization can be more competitive, so they can make more money, they can hire more people, blah, blah, blah. And trying to get the right outcomes, but make sure that they're secure, so they don't have that liability. They don't have that potential PR nightmare in front of them. And, but ultimately the politics get in the way, the timing, the effort, the budget, all these things. But in the end, those are excuses. I mean, if you were willing to do what it takes to get that done right, there's a lot of really amazing organizations out there that have said, look, I'm going to put the silliness aside. I'm going to get in there. I'm going to work with them. I'm going to, just like you said, I'm going to work with everybody. I'm going to try to find the right path for us to get the right outcome. And we see that. And I will say this too, so it doesn't sound all dark, all gloom and doom. That is the vast majority of organizations. They're looking for that. Now, that doesn't mean they always implement it right, or that it was, their threat intelligence was clear and managed correctly. But I do believe most of them want that and try for that. But there are those that just want to have the political fight. And we see those organizations, and they spend the money and the time, and it truly hurts your heart. You see these, it could be a K-12, it could be a higher education, it could be, a city or a county, it could be, a corporation that provide vital services to those in need. And you see them having these petty political fights internally, and it does. It hurts. It hurts to see that. And so one of the things I like about client facing is that we get to try to tackle that and turn that around.
Yeah, and sometimes it boils down to the people, like personality clash. And I think that even from your advisor perspective, sometimes you have the ability to come in from outside in. So you're not really necessarily part of the organization. So it might be easier for someone to say yes to you as opposed to to say yes to somebody within the organization. There's some politics involved, all of the above. And what's interesting as well is I want to kind of peel the onion. You mentioned, that organizations should assume that they're going to get breached at one point, right?
Yes.
And I noticed that you are a great proponent of coming out with a plan, for that when that happens, and also test that plan. Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, I think, there's been a couple of really illuminating things that have happened in the last couple of years that I've, either been lucky or maybe not lucky to be part of. But in this case, I was asked to do a conference for a specific sector. I'm not going to mention who it is, what sector it was, because that it wouldn't be appropriate. You'll know why here in a moment. And on this call we had, this is during COVID. There was 31 CIOs of very large, prestigious organizations, and we were talking about something else, and cybersecurity in general. Some of the things, some of the activities and actions you can take to move your organization forward. et cetera, et cetera. And I said, that brings up a good question. One of the questions I got was about something, and I went back and about instant response. I said, how many of you, by show of hands in your camera, have an incident response plan? And of the 31, only one raised their hand, which blew my mind. And then I said, tested plan, and the hand went down. And when
I'm
I got
laughing,
off,
but do you think that's typical, or do you think that's just a
no, I don't. I don't believe that's typical. I think that's just a slice of time, if you will. But it's an unfortunate slice. And what was interesting is I got off the call, and the person that hired me to do the session calls me immediately and goes, "Oh my gosh, you won't believe what happened." I said, "Well, I'm sure you're going to tell me." And he sounded distressed. So I'm like, "Oh boy, what happened?" And he goes, "Well, that was a recorded public session, and you now put all of them on notice unintentionally." And he goes, "So they're probably all running through their buildings right now going, hey, who knows about instant response? Do we have anybody who knows instant response? Call KPMG, call this." And I was like, "Well, can we go back and tell them call NETSYNC?" Because we can help them, right? Because that's what we do.
And seriously, I'm sure you you had good intentions, right? So.
Oh, I did. In fact, I didn't even pitch NETSYNC or anything in that. And I try not to, because it kind of, it's not a conflict of interest, if you will. But a lot of these, like Oracle, IBM, Cisco, they hire me to go speak. It's not about, trying to find a sale. This is about trying to provide some information to your community that it has a value. And I really try to stick to that. And if you see the stuff I put online and the videos, I really try to stick to that. But I will say this, that was impactful. It was impactful for me. It was impactful for them. And, it's one of those things where I think a lot of CIOs were not thinking that way, because the context of that was, ransomware and what's going on. Well, if you don't have instant response, you get over the ransomware, you just introduced yourself to chaos. It's those first 9 minutes are very chaotic. It's the next couple hours extremely chaotic, and then you get into the superhero, what I like to call superhero phase, where everybody's in to save the day. It's like, I'm here. I'm not even in IT, or I'm not even in administration, but I'm here to save the day. And what it does is people talk to the press, people talk to other people in the organization. The grapevine kicks off. All of a sudden, you've got total chaos. And it gets much worse. It's like that when we were little kids in kindergarten, they would give you a secret, and everybody would stand against the wall, and they'd say something like, Jill ran down the hill, and by the time it got all the way around, Jack killed Jill and threw her in a pond, and the police showed up. It was like the whole thing's it's just so bizarre. It's like the wildest, most ugliest outcome of that. And we see that all the time. And that is not in the instant response plan, but it should be. It should be tied to any kind of negative PR kind of plan you have. And there's a lot of different, there's a corporate communications plan, there's an emergency plan, there's all these different plans. Those should be connected to the incident response, because even in those, there is a digital incident response need.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I like the way you mentioned it. Everything needs to be tied into because it's organization wide, right? So you cannot have silos and that don't know what to do. We talked about prior to this call is to have muscle memory, right?
Right.
Term to when something happens, and you go, everybody knows what they're doing, and I think a lot of the time, it's not the actual breach. A breach is bad enough. But it's how you respond to it that really makes a difference, right?
It is.
And a lot of times it's like you have backup, and you find out that the backup is now 6 months old.
Well, think about it. If you're at a higher education, let's just take something everybody knows about, a college, right, or a school. And when you go there, you have chancellors, you have a board of directors, you have administration, right? If you don't have a plan, and you get hit with ransomware, and all of a sudden none of your services are available, the fact that you don't have a plan has now made it 10 times worse than what you thought, right? And so now the first question they're going to ask you, the board of directors, the chancellor, the administration, where's our plan? let's go ahead and enact our plan. Their assumption is that you have a plan. The fact that you don't have a plan says something about your professionalism. And it doesn't mean, and a lot of times it wasn't they didn't try to have one. It's just that they were so busy doing other things. Well, it was COVID. I was trying to build remote learning. I was trying to do remote work. There's always a reason why. And that's what when we started out this conversation, I was like, you have to find the time and the effort, because you must assume that you will be hit. And if you make that assumption, it's going to be in a organization level outage.
Yeah,
Or
you plan to fail, right? That's the
that's exactly right. And what's interesting is a lot of that stuff that they were pushing it off for aren't interruption type events. They just aren't. I mean, budgeting, if I don't have the budget, well, it's not going to affect the kids going to class. It's not going to affect the teachers getting their paychecks. It's not going to, you know what I mean? These are, if you look at a lot of different things, those are not organization level interruption. And I think that's where you have to delineate your priorities a lot of times, because nowadays, in the day of social media, you're going to get impacted a lot worse than you ever imagined. And it's going to be under the microscope with the weight of the world on you. And I don't think most people are prepared for that. And only when you've gone through that do you truly understand the significance and the chaos.
Yeah, and in the military, there's another concept. The way it works is they take a lot of incidents and crises and accident that happened, right? In the Air Force, for example, they analyze any crashes or any loss of life or whatever, and then you get debrief on it. So you on a weekly basis you review what caused the incident, so you can learn from it. And I don't think there's a concept like that where the executives go in, or like the company wide goes in, and there's a review of, for example, you talk about school boards, right? Of similar school boards going through a crisis. What can we learn from it? Is there lessons learned that we can apply in our potentially future, incident and so on? A lot of it is just, that's why when a crisis happens, they see it for the first time. It's never something that they've already learned. So I think this should be a lot of the training associated with these crisis things that we can learn from past events, and maybe a similar size organizations as well. So that leads me to the next question, where you specifically mentioned that let's say an incident happened. I guess after everything's said and done, I guess somebody will raise their hand and ask, "Hey, do we have insurance for this?
Right. Well, it's funny because that plays into what you just finished up on.
Yeah.
Everybody's been looking for a technology black box, so if it's an airplane or even a car, you have the computer and the PLC and all that, and you're able to get the information off when did the wreck happen, when did the airbags deploy, blah, blah, blah. Same thing on an airplane. There are products out there that do part and parcel of that, right? That create an audit trail, that give you information so that you can be used for forensics, et cetera, for reporting to local authorities. And that kind of leads into the insurance thing. A lot of times insurance wants to know who, what, and when, and they have very specific action steps in the policy. First of all, if it's over like $1 million or $2 million or $3 million, almost always it kicks off that you have to go through a process where they do an audit on your network, your organization, that assessment, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of different things.
Mark, you better have your logs turned on, right?
You better have your logs turned on, because ultimately, if you do really bad on that, they're not going to insure you. Right. So not everybody's insurable, believe it or not. But if you do pass that audit, then a lot of times what they do is they look at where some of the weaknesses are in your processes, and where, what your security posture is. And they didn't make the reporting process and the actions taken process play to their benefit to limit their liability. And it also limits yours. I mean, that's their job. You're paying to do that, right? To have them limit your liability, because you want to assume that liability and then insure for it. And I think that's one of the things that's really not as clear cut. And that's why I mentioned that Joseph Steinberg and I did an article about this because there were so many questions around it, and there's a lot of myths and half truths and all that in there. And the most unfortunate thing is there are organizations that get hit or have an incident take place, and they don't follow the right reporting process, and the insurance company does not pay.
Right, and that's I think from even a kind of a worse perspective is that it's ever evolving, just like technologies are ever evolving. The process of these policies and coverage, it's worse than when you go insure your house. Chimneys have been around, like wood stove have been around for 100 years. So
Right.
if you have a wood stove, you should declare it because part of the policy has to be in underwriting for that. But my God, for information technology and cybersecurity, I mean, how many technologies are we talking about on a regular basis? Your organization can be from a security posture and coverage and so on very different after 6 months. So
Absolutely.
then how do you make sure you're covered and you're continuously on top of it when you're applying for a policy and make sure you have the right coverage? Again, because it's a balance, it's a fine balance. How much you pay for policy, and what's your coverage, what's your risk posture, and so on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mentioned threat intelligence earlier. It's a mixture between threat intelligence, right? So you know where your vulnerabilities may exist, what kind of threats are focused on your sector, on your type of organization, on your type of security posture. But it's also looking at things like what is my organization willing? How much risk are they willing to take? If I'm in a regulatory type organization, then it's going to be different than if I'm in a restaurant organization or hospitality. Right there's a big difference there, and how I may want to what amount of risk I'm willing to assume, and how I'm going to assume that risk. Am I going to just assume the risk and say, hey, if it happens, it happens? I'll have good backups. I'll do this. I'll do that. I would suggest that one, but there are people that do. And then also, whether we're going to do that and we're going to insure for that risk. And what we're seeing now more and more and more, and you mentioned this earlier too, we're seeing a lot of people do it now. Insurance has become a really popular way. I would say this, there's a little bit of a panacea. It does not take all your risk, no matter what. There is a belief out there by some, and I've heard this a few times, is that, oh, well, you know what? I'll just go out there and I'm going to get insurance. I don't need to invest in all this cybersecurity stuff. I don't need to hire the people. I don't need to do these steps, blah, blah, blah. Or you find an IT organization that doesn't value security, which they do exist, and more than we know. And they don't want a security person coming in reporting to the CFO and taking part of their, castle or pyramid or whatever you may be. And that split of power, and it does. This I hear it all the time. So there's a lot of things that can affect. What is your posture? How much risk are you willing to assume? What kind of policy are you willing to pay for? What's your budget for that? How is that going to impact the processes within the organization? So there's a lot of things to consider. And most of the ones that I've seen that have done amazing work about getting the proper amount of insurance, the right type of insurance with the right kind of riders, because there's riders you want to get as well, versus the ones that didn't. It came down to they included their stakeholders. So they included people, because how do you know what the most important thing to secure in your organization is if you don't talk to the stakeholders? You don't. And so the organizations that have a process, they look at it very logically and thoughtfully. They include stakeholders in early. They make sure leadership is signed off on that. And then, and to your point, it's a constantly reassessed. It's reassessed every 6 months to a year. Is this the proper amount of insurance? Are there new threats and new threat intelligence that it shows us what those threats are? And then we can kind of value what that might be, and then get the proper insurance, or assume the risk, or make sure we identify it and let leadership know, so that they can take the actions that need to be taken from that. So there's a lot to that, and I know that was a lot of stuff, but believe it or not, that's why we wrote the article, because it is very complex. It seems very simple. I got car insurance. All I do is get this, and it's 100, 300, 100, and I'm done. No, it's not the same. It's just not the same.
And also you have to prove, and I think that's the underlined assumption, is that you have to prove that you've done, everything in your power to protect your organization, right?
True.
You have to prove that.
Yes.
So it's just like, when your vehicle is stolen, you don't want to be driving into a really bad neighborhood, leaving overnight, and leaving the doors unlocked,
Right.
because
Right.
because that would because that will make you look like you tried to have the car stolen, or at least didn't care about it because you thought you had insurance.
True.
um,
Yeah.
and if to take the same kind of a car analogy or whatever, I know, for example, for vehicles, like if your car parts are marked, then you get a discount. There's a break in terms of the premium that you have to pay, because you have all the security controls, alarm, you name it. Is there such a thing for cybersecurity, where companies have certain, maybe risk deployments mechanism deployed to protect the organization, and they have a better premium because of that?
There are organizations that I've heard have done this. I've not seen it myself, but when you look at the major carriers out there like AIG, Chubb, et cetera, I'm sure for theirs there is a negotiation to it, right? You can negotiate. That's a very important distinction. As far as like discounts and all that, I think it's part of that negotiation. And to your point, I think it has to do with what actions they've taken. I don't think it's just like, hey, if you go out and get this certification, you get a 5% off. I've not seen that.
Well, listen, if it was that simple, they would not need people like yourself helping them out. So it's actually not bad that it's kind of complicated. And I think it's going to continue because, as you mentioned again in one of your articles, that we came a long way from the time you are just starting to use computers for ballistic trajectory and stuff like that.
Right.
And we are becoming more and more digitized as we go. And there's going to be additional requirements for security in all aspects of our lives, including not just the enterprise but personal lives as well. So, Mark, I would love to continue. Maybe we'll do another session. I feel like we have probably another, like, 5 or 6 or 7 topics we can cover easily. But maybe just to keep this, under 40 minutes, 35 minutes. What's the best way to reach you? Like, just for advice, for maybe some services. What's the easiest way for people to reach you?
Yeah, it's just mlind at netsync.com. I'm not worried about giving my email out. We take a lot of precautions. But at NetSync, also you can go to cybervisor.com, CIYBERVIZER.com. That's my personal, or LinkedIn, or Twitter, Instagram. I answer all those. I watch those pretty closely. I try to be active in the community. We do a lot of things. We just did an amazing Women of Cyber, and had women from all over the world, 54 of them, and some amazing women. And we got some more coming up as well. And it's a really great community out there. I love being part of it. We talked about Joseph earlier; he's part of the community. Shira Rubinoff, Joe Peterson, Chuck Brooks. There's a lot of us. We're all good friends. We've all spent a lot of time together, and it's a great way. So they can reach me through any of those, and I monitor those fairly closely.
Thanks so much, Mark, and thanks for giving back to the community. Much, much appreciated. And I'm hoping to see you maybe in person. Maybe you'll take the trip from Texas to New York City.
I go up there. I'm up there a couple times a year. In fact, last week I was in San Jose and San Francisco. So I travel pretty much every week at some
So
point.
we'll have you for sure for the one of the in-person events in New York City. You're a great speaker, and I love following your work. And again, I recommend to anybody who's not following Mark yet, go ahead and do it. And again, much appreciated. Looking forward to seeing you in the next event. Thanks all for joining, and be safe all. Take care.
Thanks, Dan.